15 Creepy Confessions of Chilling Things Seen by Truck Drivers. The job of a truck driver is very often misunderstood and much less appreciated than it should actually be. For starters, it is definitely not the kind of work that anyone can do. On the contrary, you'd have to be willing to put up with a lot of things that regular people try their best to avoid. Apart from the obvious part that is the actual driving for very extended periods of time, truck drivers have to deal with the life on the road, which usually consists of little sleep, bad food, spending the night in rather shady locations, and occasionally much weirder stuff. They inevitably meet all kinds of weird characters and witness things that most people can't even begin to imagine. And while some of their stories might seem a little far-fetched, it's because most of us can't even begin to understand what a life of constantly driving from place to place is like. If you've ever spoken to a lifelong truck driver, chances are, you've heard some unbelievable stories. But while there are quite a lot of them, it's hard to meet one if you live the city life, because, they're usually on the road. Fortunately, today we have this amazing thing called the internet, and truckers are not the kind of people that would pass on telling a great road story. So, get ready because you're about to read the most bizarre and terrifying confessions of things seen or experienced by truck drivers. 15. The Little Girl and Her Mother. It seems that truckers have some kind of magnet for the paranormal. This one confession from Ranker is not spooky but just very, very bizarre. Missouri, I stopped at an off-ramp to stretch out and take a breather. As I'm smoking a cigarette, a little girl from some direction I couldn't figure out giggles and says, "Hi, mister." My initial reaction was, the FCK is a little kid doing out here at this time? So I talk back and say hi. She then responds with, "My mommy says you'll be okay, don't worry." Now utterly confused, I ask her what she means. No response. Then suddenly, I feel like somebody is standing next to me, but it doesn't feel negative or bad. Just feels like somebody is right there next to me. Since it didn't have a negative vibe to it, I just finished my cigarette and left. Later on down the road, I realized that I forgot to fuel up at my last stop when the warning light came on. So I scramble to look at my GPS and find the nearest truck stop. I find one and set the course. As I roll up to the truck stop, my truck starts sputtering and I barely make it to the fuel line before the truck starts dying. I ran out of fuel right as I got on the fuel line. It wasn't until I was fueling up that it occurred to me what the hell happened at my last stop. This guy probably lost his mind when he finally put all the pieces back together. There really isn't any explanation for this in the realm of this world, is there? 14. A mysterious fireball. I don't really know what this could have been. Maybe it was a meteor or a comet, although as the story goes, it seems more likely to be some kind of explosion. This trucker must have had quite a shock. After all, he was on Route 666. This driver confessed on Ranker. A few years back, I was traveling through Utah native land in New Mexico on Highway 491. 491 used to be Route 666, but they changed it a few years back. I think people were stealing the signs. Anyways, I'm in the middle of the desert around midnight, no lights or civilization for miles, when up in the sky there's a huge, orange flash. The orange flash quickly inflated into a giant ball, bigger than the sun. It even had a fiery-looking texture to it. Suddenly, the orange ball disappeared, and the entire desert sky, horizon to horizon, flashed a bright yellow, lighting up the everything around me like it was daytime. Then everything went back to normal. This all happened within a few seconds, but it was definitely the weirdest thing I've seen on the road. 13. The whipped cream explosion. While some of the stories are dark and terrifying, there are also some that are simply hilarious, and this is definitely one of them. One truck driver confessed on Reddit. A friend of mine has a relative who is an owner-operator. One time, he was supposed to ship containers of whipped cream from one state to another, passing through the Rocky Mountains. He looked at the route that was provided and realized he could save time by taking another road through the mountains. Once he gets to the other side of the mountain, he stops for a meal or something and checks in the back. Turns out the pass he took was high enough in altitude that the pressure caused the lids to pop off all of the containers, and the inside of his trailer was covered in whipped cream. This sounds like it's straight out of a comedy movie script. It would definitely bring the audience to tears of laughter. 12. The barking dog. This is what the man expected to see when he looked out the window of his truck, after hearing a dog barking tirelessly for 10 minutes. What he actually saw left him scarred for many years to come. He confessed on Reddit. One night, about 10 minutes into my nap, I was awoken by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but it carried on for several minutes and got louder as the dog got closer. Soon, it became apparent that the dog was right outside of my truck barking at me. Okay, either this dog is Lassie and is trying to alert me to something, or else he is just a pain in the ass and I will need to throw something at him to scare him off. It is important to note that the barking had been going on for a good 10 minutes at this point. So, I sat up and looked out my window. Standing there, mere inches on the other side of the glass, was a man of about 35. He was a large fellow. And was barking at me. His eyes were crazy and he was frothing at the mouth a little. The scene really held my full attention for a moment. The sheer creepiness of this struck me. Gently, and making an absolute minimum of sudden movements, I reached down and started my truck and slowly pulled away. He chased me, much like you might expect an angry dog to do, barking all the while. 11. The Ghost Soldier. Bizarre ghost stories are something that truckers have no shortage of. Sure, the lack of sleep may get you to see some weird things that aren't there, but that doesn't really make it any less creepy of an experience for this guy. The driver confessed on Ranker. My first couple years, I was a night driver, so it was hard to see things sometimes. But the one in PA was me trying to follow a flatbedder who was hauling Serious A through the mountains. At one point, I start to fall back because I can feel the van starting to lean. It wasn't long after that I reached down to take a swig off the handy monster I had, and I look up, and there's a guy standing off to the shoulder just outside the tree line wearing in what appeared to be some type of soldier's uniform. Looked like Revolutionary War era. He had a musket as well. As I approach, I can see him staring right at me, and then he starts walking back into the tree line still looking at me. Before he manages to make it through the trees, he disappears. Like literally vanishes in thin air. I had my windows down, and the air in the area got real cold. After about a mile, the air warmed up again. I had a really sad feeling come over me for a while afterward. Needless to say, I didn't stop for the rest of my shift. 10. The Mystery Load. As a trucker, you might get some weird transports here and there. This guy could have gotten in big trouble, but he did exactly what he was told and it all worked out. In some way. He confessed on Reddit. This is a word-of-mouth story. A friend of a friend is a mechanic and an older truck driver would always just hang out there around his shop. He told him this story. Apparently, once, he was approached to carry a load in an unmarked big rig by some sort of government agency. They had approached him because of his squeaky clean record. He was not allowed to know what was inside of the truck, and he was at no point allowed to stop. He was also of course not allowed to let anyone look at what was inside the truck. If at any point someone was trying to gain entry, he was to push a red button. Anyway, following orders, this guy passes a wait station without stopping. Sure enough, a cop gets after him. He finally pulls over and pushes the red button. Soon enough, a convoy of unmarked cars comes and deals with the cop and he returns on his way. Now, what could have possibly been in that truck? 9. Your brakes are on fire. As if these weren't already creepy enough, one truck driver made this confession on Ranker. I remember passing another truck pulled to the shoulder on my way up, nothing out of the ordinary. However, as I was heading down the mountain, which can be scary as SHT in an 18-wheeler, trust me, I saw the same truck I passed earlier fly by me in the left-hand lane. Now being passed on the left going downhill in the Rocky Mountains by another tractor-trailer is crazy enough, but what really makes this story is this guy's trailer brakes were on fire. He was pulling a load, could tell because the trailer was sealed, and if you know anything about trucks, you know there's only so much braking you're supposed to do before they overheat and, worst case, catch fire. This guy's truck looked like a f-king comet as he sped down the mountain at what I thought was a surely to be deadly pace. I grabbed the mic to the radio and called out to him, "Hey driver. Your brakes are on fire. I mean literally on fire." After a few seconds of static, a rough and weathered sounding voice comes back over the speaker of my radio and says, "Cool as a cucumber, I know." And he disappeared around a curve. I never saw any wrecked truck, emergency crews, or even mention of an accident over the radio. I did see a discarded fire extinguisher on the ground at the base of the mountain though. Seems like the guy clearly had it under control. Maybe it wasn't his first time going down the Rocky Mountains with his wheels on fire. 8. When in Arizona. My mom is a trucker, this is her story. She was driving through Arizona when she saw what she thought was leaves blowing across the road in the distance. This puzzled her since there's mostly pine trees in northern Arizona. When she finally got to the leaves she realized that they were migrating tarantulas, thousands of them. There were so many of them that her truck was sliding on their guts so she had to slow down. She stopped at the first truck stop and told her co-driver to fuel up, he was sleeping at the time, because she wasn't going to step foot outside after what she just saw. Her co-driver was pissed since it was technically his time off, and he thought she was crazy, until he saw the tarantula guts and legs caked in the inside wheel well of the truck. I guess she didn't get out of the truck for at least a couple 100 miles after running over those leaves. Anyway, this is a nice play on the stereotype that women are afraid of spiders, but you gotta admit this is one hardcore trucker mom. I mean, the sight of thousands of tarantulas crossing the road ahead would definitely terrify me beyond anything I can think of. 7. Frozen in time. Perhaps you were wondering where all the UFO stories are. This trucker had all sorts of weird experiences, and he chose to share this one on Ranker. I can't imagine what I'd think if something like this would happen to me. New Mexico, Nevada, and Utah are some states that to this day, I still see ST in the skies that I can't explain. Lights rapidly changing direction and taking off at blinding speeds, but no sound barrier being broken. I've seen lights hovering over the desert several miles off the interstate, then it suddenly takes off and the lights cut out. Various shapes and sizes from what I can make out, again, night driver. I know military aircraft pretty well, and some of them more than likely were, but some of them absolutely cannot be any military aircraft currently in mainstream use. Conventional aircraft do not move like that. The most vivid one would be at an off-ramp in New Mexico. I stopped to take a piss. And decided to turn it into a 15-minute break since my A was sore anyway. As I'm stargazing and admiring how clear the sky is, I saw what looked like a formation of lights in the shape of a triangle lift off from the desert floor, and then take off into the sky. I kept my eyes on it, and it just kept gaining altitude until the lights just disappeared. I look down at my watch and notice it's not ticking, so I pull out my phone and it's off. I turn my phone on, and according to the time on my phone, it had been 5 minutes since my watch stopped. I felt like whatever it was that just took off had something to do with it. Whoa. Talk about creepy beyond belief. 6. The second moon. This woman had a truck driver for a husband and she took to Reddit her trucker husband's experience. This is my husband's and I'm wondering if anyone can explain it. So he's sleeping in the back as his partner is in Wyoming on the 80, middle of the night, full moon. And they stop somewhere, way out in the middle of nowhere, because my husband has to pee. So they both get out and look up, and it looks like there's another moon in the sky. He says it was bigger than the moon, pale white, and there were flames dancing around it. It never moved, and they both stared at it for a while. He's also seen weird lights around Phoenix while driving on the 10. Whatever that is. Perhaps someone who's into astronomy can explain this in some way. What could this trucker see on the sky that would resemble a big moon with flames dancing around it? Maybe it was one of the other planets or some weird eclipse. 5. The Time Capsule. Just when we thought truck stops couldn't get any creepier. Came up into Kentucky from Tennessee on some back road middle of the night, very foggy. We stopped at a truck stop and immediately felt really uncomfortable there. We were in a modern Freightliner, but every other truck was at least 30 years old, and it wasn't a tiny truck stop, probably around 30-40 spaces. Whatever, still hungry and have to pee. We walk inside and this place is just unreal. It was like we stepped right into the 70s. Everything was old, but looked new. There was even motor oil in cans, not plastic containers. Sodas in glass bottles. The way they spoke seemed off. We looked like aliens compared to how everyone was dressed. It just sent shivers up both of our spines the entire time. We left and never looked back. It was like an episode of The Twilight Zone. What do you think about this truck driver's confession on Reddit? Was this some paranormal occurrence or just a bunch of people that really pulled off 70s night? You be the judge. 4. The Masked Man. You might have noticed so far that the weirdest stories come from the desert. This one is no exception. Just imagine how creepy it is to drive at night in the middle of nowhere, and then experience something like this. Driving from Albuquerque to Socorro. I was on a stretch with no lights. Perfectly dark. I notice someone standing on the side of the road. As I pass him, my lights fully illuminate his face. Nothing about this guy seemed natural. His posture was weird, he was wearing a gray suit. And his face. It just looked off, like a mask or something. For about half a second, we lock eyes. Even with my headlights blinding him, it still felt like he was looking at me, not my truck. It really creeped me the FCK out. Shortly after this, my CB started picking up some odd chirps, but I was pretty close to the VLA. The high desert is a weird place. Ranker. 3. The Ghostwriter. Have you seen the Ghostwriter movies? I mean, that guy's quite a badass, riding his epic motorcycle while taking the form of a skeleton engulfed in flames. Well, let me tell you, he's got nothing on this trucker, blazing down the interstate like a fiery comet. My trucking days were SHT, but I got some good stories from them. Going south on I-75 in Georgia at around 3 a.m., I see this bright light maybe about 2 miles behind me. Not only is it super bright, but it is on the interstate and it is hauling a. It's big too, and it's moving faster than anything I think I'd ever seen. This thing closes the distance between us and flies past me, probably doing around 120. I had the window down and as it went past me, I felt this massive amount of heat. When it passed me, I could finally tell what it was. Get this. It was a hay hauler, a truck that hauls a trailer designed for hay, and the entire load of hay in the back was ablaze. I jumped in the CB and screamed, "Driver, your trailer is on fire." The driver comes back in a surprisingly calm voice with, "I know, I'm just letting it burn off. I figure if I go fast enough, I can keep my cab from getting burned." Well, I think we've found the ultimate truck driver. If this guy really pulled it off, I think he deserves his own movie franchise. 2. The Moose Carriage. This is a really twisted story. The other people on the road must have been genuinely terrified at what they were witnessing. Here's one confession made by one truck driver on Reddit. I used to work as a driver for a soft drink company in Alaska. We have a real problem with moose crossing the roads up here. Needless to say, one morning, I was on my way from Anchorage to the valley and a moose decided to run out in between the car in front of me and my truck. Luckily, I barely hit the moose in the ass and it runs away. So I drive for another half an hour or so and a few people have honked at me, assuming general douchebaggery. I back up my trailer to Wally World and let the warehouse guy unload. I come out to about 20 people standing around my truck, consumers and workers. Look at the moose guard on the front and there is a moose fetus tangled inside of it. Apparently, when I hit the mother and forced to have an abortion. It was truly terrifying. 1. The Road Bunnies. My dad, who just died last November, was a long-haul trucker from his teens until his mid-30s. He never told us a lot of stories, except the one about how he knew it was time to get off the road when the pills he was taking to stay awake made him see giant rabbits on the road, but his favorite was when he was about 19, he went across a bridge in the middle of the night, then was surprised to be pulled over. Turns out, the lights on the bridge were all wired together over the roadway and his trailer had been high enough to catch the wires, and very efficiently pulled down every single light pole. How he didn't hear what was going on is probably due to how much attention he was having to pay to the Road Bunnies, Reddit. Well, this story is just funny because nobody got hurt and also because of the Road Bunnies. Nonetheless, driving like this is very dangerous for both the trucker and other drivers. And also, why bunnies?